everybody. Welcome back. I have a lot on my mind today. I have a lot of different topics, so this is going to be a bit of a mixed salad, so to speak. In the conversations I have with people that I work with, friends, in my private mentoring work I do, people sometimes start to discuss boundaries. And what people realize is that they have had somebody in their life that's encroached on the boundaries. They have let that encroachment happen and they want to fix it. They want to sort of put up some kind of boundary. They want to push back. But I began to realize some time ago that if you're pushing back using the same mindset that allowed the boundaries to be crossed, then all you're doing is sort of muscling up or armoring up against what somebody's doing. And it got me thinking about a way to try to describe a better, a more permanent fix. And of course, it always comes back to an inside job. I had a psychotherapist back in, I think it was 2017, and I described something I was struggling with. And he said to me, "Oh, you want dignity." And I go, "Yeah, I guess so. What is it exactly?" And he sort of explained it to me. And I was sort of looking up a definition of dignity that I thought was kind of interesting. So let me just read you this definition. Dignity is the inherent sense of worth, value, and respect that every person deserves simply by being human. It's not something you earn, it's something you have. At its core, dignity is about recognizing someone's humanity, their right to be seen, heard, treated fairly, and not dehumanized or diminished. Now, the important thing here as well, because it says at its core, dignity is about recognizing someone's humanity, your humanity. At its core, dignity is about recognizing your humanity, your right to be seen, heard, treated fairly, and not dehumanized or diminished. And that's why I say it's an inside job, because I understand more and more dignity doesn't come from the outside. Dignity is not bestowed by other people. It's a sense one has of oneself. You know, I also look at like self-love, self-care. You know, a lot of people find it easy to sort of quote unquote love other people, but when it comes to themselves, they have this feeling of disgust, like somehow they don't deserve love, which I believe is very deeply related to dignity. So what's the opposite of dignity? Shame, disrespect, dehumanization, objectification, coercion or control. And the thing I'm understanding more and more, while those things can happen from the outside, we also do them to ourselves. We mistreat ourselves on a scale that's quite shocking at times. So when I talk to people about boundaries, you know, you can put up boundaries, and yes, you can armor up and steel against what people are doing. But if you start to examine the concept of dignity and the idea of having dignity towards oneself, love towards oneself, something really interesting happens. You go back into that situation, and what felt very upsetting before starts to feel like, yeah, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do this. And it's not so much that you feel like you rage against the injustice. It's more that you recognize you don't deserve this. This is not for you. They can do what they're doing, but this is not for you. Now, of course, you know, if you're stuck in a situation with somebody, for instance, who's narcissistically abusive, who you're, you know, married to, you have children, it's more difficult. But I really do think more and more that the way to work with boundaries is by the internal work of self-love, the internal work of developing dignity for ourselves. And those of you who have done it, or those of you who are practitioners or psychologists or whatever that have done inner child work with yourself or other people, I think you know what I mean. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot. You know, if I have a sense of dignity towards myself, there's a lot of situations that I'm not going to go into. There's a lot of choices that I'm going to make differently, as opposed to just armoring up against what they're doing, you know? So just the thought I was having. So another thought, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And you know, during the making of the vow, in some of the other projects I'm doing, I tend to talk to a lot of, cult survivors. And sometimes I notice with some of them, they come out of a situation, be it a cult, be it an abusive relationship, and they just want to forget about it. They just want to, as they say, move on with their lives. And I found that when you do that, when you just walk away and bury everything that happened, it basically sits there and festers. It could be years. And I learned this at one of the first cult conferences I went to when I got out, is I talked to people who said, I tried to bury it and 10 years later it popped up, and 20 years later it popped up in my marriage, with my children, with whatever. All that trauma stays buried. And now one context I experienced this in is, when I talk to, cult survivors, who are considering becoming whistleblowers or considering maybe going on camera. Sometimes there comes a point where they get absolutely terrified and they just back out completely. Sometimes even when there's a contract and everything, they just back out. And of course, I'm never going to coerce them into being on camera. And they'll say things like, I just want to move on. And I'll sometimes check in with them later, or I'll check in with people that know them, and they go, yeah, it's not going well. They're really struggling. And so I say this not because I'm trying to get people to, all become whistleblowers and, go public and all those kinds of things, but I do think the decision sometimes to just want to move on and pretend that shit never happened is not the best way to go. Because what happens is the cult, the relationship, the whatever, probably leveraged your childhood trauma as well. So now you have your childhood trauma, plus you have like maybe the cult trauma. Now you're trying to bury all that and cover it all up. It will come up again. It's going to come up. It's going to affect your life. And so I say to people, look, you don't have to be in this project. You don't have to be in this film. You don't have to be in this series. But at minimum, get therapy so that you can work through this stuff, so you don't have to be burdened by this for the rest of your life. And again, when I talk about therapists, I mean really good therapists, people who do somatic work, people who understand, that it's not in a narcissistic abusive relationship. It's not like, oh, it takes two to tango. What did you do? Fuck that. No. They were a malignant narcissist, a sociopath, a psychopath. The person had no idea what they were dealing with. It's not a case of it takes two to tango. But they need to go into therapy, and they need to process that stuff. And they may process it quietly. The world may never know, and that's totally fine. But just something I've been thinking a lot about is, the idea of just burying it. Don't do that. It's not buried. It's never buried. I mean, you may be playing a game of hide and go seek with yourself where you think it's not there, but it's there. And people around you can see it's there because of the decisions, we're making, and the sort of the way we might fly off the handle suddenly at the littlest of things because we're not able to deal with stuff very well. So that was another thing I was thinking about. Then archaeology. So I think it was last year, maybe it was the year before, I did a podcast episode on WTF is on my mind. It's on YouTube and podcast platforms. Podcast. I said plodcast. Podcast platforms. And it was called Those Fucking Conspiracy Theorists. ! And I've been thinking a lot about that episode, given some of the recent findings that have happened. And by the way, I just want to go back to that concept of conspiracy theorists. I have to say to people, like, if you're still calling people conspiracy theorists, like, you are really in the fucking dark, because the amount of conspiracy theories that have turned out to be correct is fucking staggering. I got to tell you, the conspiracy theorists they're batting very well. Now, I know some people say, well, specifically, what do you mean? Just look it up. Don't look it up from the same source that told you that these people that believe this thing are conspiracy theorists. Go somewhere else. And it doesn't mean necessarily go to the other party's propaganda platform. Go and look at independent media, because a lot of things that have been considered conspiracy theories have been turned out to be correct. Even the New York Times now says, oh, we were misled. The lab leak, blah, 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 gain of function, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. A lot of people have been talking about gain of function for a long time. And the New York Times is now like, we were misled. Yeah. NYT, you did a lot of the misleading, just FYI. So I would dig into which so-called conspiracy theories and lunatics turned out to be correct. Because if what's fighting those theories is, billion-dollar corporations using their propaganda media to silence those people, it's probably true what the theorists are saying. But anyway, I digress slightly as I set the story up. So in that episode, I spoke about Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock, not an archaeologist, but I had the privilege of meeting him a number of years ago, and his wife as well. And one of the things he talks about and has talked about for a long time is that there's been multiple extinction events on planet Earth. And that our sort of accepted story of archaeology is not necessarily true. That there are things that he's found and other people have found that suggest civilizations much older than is suggested by mainstream archaeology. And so I talked about that as an example on that particular podcast. And what was interesting, I was talking about, somebody that insists that something has to be true with maybe little or some evidence is the same as a person that insists it cannot be true. Like, there are archaeologists, there are organizations that say things like, history's been figured out. There are no ancient civilizations. We know it to be true. And the thing is, do they know it to be true? Yeah, maybe, because they've deleted everything that is any of the data that goes to the contrary. And what was so funny, by the way, when I looked at the comments, is people in the comments did the exact pattern I was talking about. They were saying, well, there's no proof, and Graham Hancock is not an archaeologist, and blah, 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 blah. They did the same pattern that I was talking about. They insisted that he was a charlatan. So then why is this interesting? Because now, in the last week, there's all these stories in the media about the Pyramid of Khafre in Egypt. They did these scans, I think it was from satellites, called SAR, synthetic aperture radar tomography. And the findings that they found, I think it was under the Pyramid of Khafre, they found by scanning, non-invasive scanning, they found 5 multi-level structures located near the pyramid's base. And these identical formations are connected by geometric passageways. Well, that's kind of interesting. But then it gets more weird. Apparently, there are 8 vertical cylindrical wells that go down under the pyramid. They go down about 648 meters. Meters, not feet. And these wells are encircled by spiral pathways leading to 2 cube-shaped chambers, and they each measure 80 meters per side. Now, what are they? I don't know. Are they scalar wave generators? Are they I don't know I don't think anybody knows what they are. But the fact is that there's something down there. It seems to be constructed. And the question is, of course, is how the hell did those primitive Egyptians create something that far underground? I mean, we're talking like skyscrapers type things under the ground. And I just find it interesting because, all the people that have been shitting on Graham Hancock and then the few people that shat on me in that podcast episode, I'm just very curious as to what they think now. Like, was there a fault in the satellite? Is it made up? Is it a conspiracy theory? Is synthetic aperture radar tomography like bullshit? I'm just really curious. And those of you who still listen to my podcast, if you haven't been deeply offended enough, I really would like to know what you think now. Because this finding suggests that our version of history that we love and accept and insist on may be completely full of shit. So I was thinking about that. Then another thing I was thinking about. My previous podcast episode was with a dear friend of mine who I've had on 2 times before. I'm not going to say her name, and there's a reason why. Let's just say she is Black, and she is from the same continent I'm from. Now, what was so interesting is the last podcast episode I did with her last year, I put up on podcast platforms, and then I put up on YouTube. And the numbers were very low. I was like, that's so weird. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just making shit up. And then I did another podcast episode with her, and the numbers were staggeringly low. Like, I was like, what is going on? I put the video up at the same time as I always do on Sundays. I put the video up and I'm like, Jesus, it's like a quarter of what the others are. And I was thinking, oh, I think her name or what we discussed is being shadow banned. And I find it so interesting that the Google, the purveyor of freedom, found it fit, because I'm pretty sure this is shadow banned, found it fit to suppress a suppressed person, right? Because the belief is in Silicon Valley, the philosophy is that the minorities are suppressed. Okay, so but now there's a minority that's on, and now the minority is being suppressed. And somebody might say, yeah, but Mark, it's AI. Oh, and where did that, like, how did that get programmed? Like, who programmed AI? See, the thing that people think, I don't know why they think this is, it's just the algorithm. Motherfucker, the algorithm is programmed by some idiot. Some person who's either terrified or was instructed that they had to be terrified of certain thoughts and ideas. So they programmed the algorithm to find certain keywords. And if those keywords show up, they need to suppress, shadow ban, or hide something from the public because the public is too stupid or impressionable and they might get in some way affected. It's always interesting to me when I think about authoritarian regimes. Think about it. Or thought systems. There's some information that they're so terrified of you having that they'll do anything to stop it. And what's interesting is what they don't realize is what the rest of us see is that they're weak. They're very, very weak, because if they were strong and strongly convicted, they would be like, you can have any information you want. We believe in what we believe in, and we think these are good things. But they don't do that. They just try and suppress people. And it's a bit like somebody who's jealous of somebody else, or this is slightly different. But, if you see somebody who's excelling, and you could be like, man, I want to excel like that. Or you could figure out, how do I suppress that person so that I don't feel so bad? It's really fucked up. And so I keep thinking about in this sort of authoritarian thinking, rather than let the free flow of ideas, you need to suppress them because maybe it's going to affect you in some way, ideologically, financially, but you're terrified of the idea. So I'm really curious, and this is a question for the Google gods, YouTube, the AI, and the people that programmed the AI. What is so terrifying about the conversation I had with this guest? This guest is black, is bald. You guys can figure out yourself who it is. I don't want to say their name because I think their name is it's a name that's being suppressed. And what is so unfortunate about the suppression of that episode, the very last one before this one, is that it's probably one of the best podcast episodes I've ever done in my life. And she said so as well. I mean, we had a meeting. I was just in London meeting with her as well. And we just marveled at the episode. We marveled at what came out of it. We marveled at what we learned. We marveled at what people were getting out of it, because the few people that were seeing it were commenting, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly. And we were just blown away. And we thought it was so sad. Well, she didn't know this information at that point, but I thought later it was so sad that this amazing conversation was being shadow banned. And it was interesting because I did a bunch of research on YouTube about her. And I noticed something interesting. So 2 or 3 years ago, she did a podcast episode with Jordan Peterson, and it blew up. I mean, it was like 3 million views. And then her numbers just went way down. And then she did one on Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. Pretty big. And now all the stuff more recently, very, very low. So somehow the conversations that she had, probably starting with Jordan Peterson, pissed somebody off so bad that some little shit went in there and fucked with the code of Google and YouTube to make sure that people wouldn't hear the voice of a profoundly wise black woman. Now, I don't care what ideological infection you have to admit that's pretty fucked up. That shit is fucked up. So People say there is no censorship. Yeah, there's censorship. People say free speech is bad. Yeah? Is this bad? In fact, do me a favor. Please go and watch the episode or listen to the episode, but go to YouTube and in the comments section, tell me what were the keywords that were used that got that thing suppressed. I'm really curious. And you might not be able to spell the word out properly, whatever the words were or the word, you might not be able to spell it properly. And I know sometimes people come up with like ways to say a word so that the algorithm won't spot it. But I really want to know what you think the word or words were. It could be her name, but I have a feeling it's also some of the content. Like somehow we've offended the community. We didn't. There's no strike that I'm aware of. I think this is happening on the back end. So I'm really curious to see what you guys think. But please go and listen to that episode. I mean, fucking profound. And we talked about in London about we want to do more stuff like that, where instead of just coming on as the grand poobah that knows everything, maybe we have other people come on and we approach each other with things we're challenged by, ways we want to think about something, but we don't know how to think about it, and be open-minded and vulnerable and humble to try to come to a better understanding of some concept or whatever. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about today was, I reserve responding to people on social media. I reserve that for my Patreon audience. My Patreon audience, whatever questions they ask me, I respond to, I think about, I talk about, I do Q&As. But there was something recently, I think it was on Instagram, and one of the more recent posts of this particular woman I'm talking about, who's been shadow banned. And they said, it was related to a comment where I said that the world's gone mad and everybody thinks it's just normal. And she said, this is a quote, she said, "One of the things that Mark said that made me think was the world has gone mad. I thought about this and immediately started thinking about how we're able to see the world. It is through social media lenses. I grew up in a cult where the world was anyone not in the cult. It's insane how we can't see the world except through some weird mirror. I don't know what I'm seeing. I think I'm just responding and reacting to something that says it's the world, but I have no idea what that actually is at this point." I thought it was interesting because it's true. When we think of the world, what are we thinking of? Is it just what the algorithm is telling us? If you're in a left-leaning algorithm, you're getting certain information, and then you're reacting en masse with that information. You're burning cars and painting swastikas and whatever. And if you're in the right algorithm, you're doing a bunch of other things and you're saying a bunch of other things, and so you're stuck in these things. So what's the way out? What's the way to freedom? And the thing that I found is I don't really pay a lot of attention to the algorithm, and I don't pay a lot of attention to mainstream media because, again, mainstream media, by that I mean the big corporations, they're funded by somebody that has a certain message. They're infiltrated by intelligence agencies. So what we're hearing sometimes is like a trial balloon. A trial balloon is where the intelligence, leaks something to like Reuters, AP, whatever, and says, leak something, and then that thing gets leaked, and then they watch to see how the public reacts. It's not that thing is necessarily going to happen or is true. It's just that they want to see how the public responds, because they're always trying to get as much as they can consent from the public for a war, for whatever, whatever's going on. I don't think that's the world. But I'm lucky because I get to travel. I get to talk to lots of people in different parts of the world. And my experience of the world, my experience of different people, and if you take America, I have friends on the left, I have friends on the right, I have friends who are libertarians. And I talk to them about their experiences. And for most people, what they're seeing on television is not the experience they're actually having. I'm going to give an example that's going to piss a lot of people off, but at this point I don't fucking care. It seems that if one kind of news tells you that racism is worse than it's ever been ever before, which is interesting because when I talk to my friends who are of a different race, they go, that's not true. That's not their experience. It depends kind of where you are. If you're in a bubble where you think that and you spend time with people that feel that way, yes, it seems terrible, but the average person is not experiencing. It doesn't have to be racism. It can be whatever. And pick any topic that the mainstream media is pushing very hard. The average experience of people in the world is very different than the tiny, tiny, tiny thing that's been focused on by the news. So for me, when I talk about the world, I guess in answer to this, the question she has is, I take a smattering. I take a smattering of the different extreme perspectives that are coming through the news organizations. And I don't think that's the world. I think that's an attempt to push a worldview. Somebody is trying to push a worldview. So I go, okay, so somebody, and it's probably somebody in the 1%, is trying to push a certain agenda. Then there's comments, and this is what's so interesting. When you go to like YouTube comments or Instagram comments or Twitter comments or whatever, and you start to see the way people respond, it's really interesting. Now, of course, that could be curated. The algorithm could be doing a bunch of shit there, but it's really interesting to see what people say. The common person calls bullshit on what's being said a lot. Now, I'm not talking about if you're in a little Facebook group where you're in a bubble, because then everybody agrees and all your friends agree. I'm talking about just the average place in the world, the average place online where things are said and then you see people's response. It's really interesting. And I learned a lot. A filmmaker taught me this once in 2020 when shit was starting to go haywire. I said, how the people are thinking all these things. He says, no. Read the comments. That's where you see what people really think. It's really, really interesting. But my sense is because we're being so propagandized, I feel like the best thing to do is to talk to other people. And I don't mean your tribe. I mean other tribes, other people, other races, other religions. I mean, just other, and talk to the other that you're taught to hate and you're told to hate and you're told are Nazis or libtards or whatever the word is. When you go and talk to those people, it's a very, very different experience. And I swear to God, you start to get hope. Because when you look at the algorithms on social media and you look at news, it's so fucking bleak. And if that's all you look at and you stay at home, you're going to feel suicidal. So my suggestion is get out there, talk to the people you wouldn't talk to normally, interact with them. I mean, one of the things I think that is so interesting is I try to stay away from partisan issues. I try to stay away from like race issues and sex politics issues and whatever, and talk about what I hope are universal patterns. And a lot of people reach out to me, and they're from different religions, and they're different races, and they're different nationalities, and they talk to me, they tell me stuff, and I start to build a picture of what their world is like and what their worldview is like, and it's honestly really different than the news. I feel like the news is like a virtual reality simulation that is being fed into us. I mean, it feels a bit like the Matrix sometimes. You're just fed, a reality. So anyway, these are some of the things I've been thinking about a lot in the last few weeks. Been doing a lot of traveling. I was in LA, I was in London. I'm heading off to an undisclosed location soon. I can't say where. I still have enemies. My enemies are listening. So are their lawyers. Fun times. Anywho, as always, stay curious.